Hey, Penn State fans, Bob Flounders here, joined on a Wednesday, pretty nice Wednesday, by Daniel Gallen in State College. I'm in Harrisburg. We are getting to yet another Blue-White Breakdown podcast, PennLive's Penn State football podcast. Typically, we're going to talk quite a bit of Penn State football in this one as well. But just a reminder, Daniel will be back later in the week with Dustin Hockensmith. I'm going to guess there might be some really good recruiting convo going on there, but Daniel, I don't want to speak for you. I know you might still be outlining your podcast, but I thought, Daniel, considering what the Penn State men's basketball team did last night, and considering that you were there, and considering that apparently Tom Izzo threw a little bit of a hissy fit and made some Michigan State players unavailable, which is, I guess, never happens with Michigan State. He must have been pretty upset about them blowing that lead and Penn State winning a very, very hard-fought defensive game. What did that game, do you think, mean for Penn State? And if they can keep it going with a win over Minnesota, does that change anything for you with those Penn State Nittany Lions?
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge win. 62-58. Penn State was down by 14 early in the second half. Micah Shrewsbury finally got his first technical foul as the Penn State coach. It was honestly a surprise that it took that long to get to that point. I mean, there's kind of that funny dynamic with basketball coaches sometimes where you can tell. And there were a couple moments the past few weeks where it looked like Shrewsbury was, pleading a case to get the technical, but that was part of like a 4-point swing because they were down by, I think, 7, and that made it an 11-point game with the 2 free throws in possession. But Penn State kind of just worked their way back. They got some good 3-pointers. Sam Sessoms hit a couple shots. Seth Lundy I think he was 5 of 12 from deep. And then John Hara was just working the paint the whole game.
There was a lot of love on Twitter for John. I saw that people were really, really impressed. And it's obviously this wasn't an isolated incident, Daniel, but I mean, it just seems like he is definitely one of those lunch pail kind of guys that if you need some dirty work done, he's your guy. But yeah, I noticed right away a lot of people felt like he played a big role. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just noticed it too. There's a love-a-thon going on right now with John.
No, Hara had a great game, and he's had a couple quiet games this year, but he really made his presence felt, and that was big for Penn State. I mean, he's the emotional leader of the team, fifth-year senior, a pretty big tone setter, big culture guy. So it was a really top performance from him. But overall, I mean, it's the biggest win they've had under Micah Shrewsbury. I mean, the double overtime win over Iowa 2 weeks ago was big, but this one, it's his first win against a ranked team. Michigan State was number 19 last night. Obviously, it's Michigan State. I mean, that's a Big Ten program with a lot of clout. It's a name. And the fashion that they did it with, where they were down by 14, got it back to 1, and then it was kind of that kind of touch and go where Michigan State would bump it back out to 4, it would get back to 3, and then Seth Lundy had a very nice step back jumper in the mid-range to put Penn State in front, and they made it down the stretch. They made it to the finish line. So it's a big game. Their next 4 games are all against teams that are below them in the standings. Minnesota, Maryland, Northwestern, Nebraska, all those games except for Maryland are at home. Penn State lost to Minnesota on Saturday night, but it's still a winnable game, and maybe coming home will help a little bit. So I think Penn State they're in good shape. I mean, if they can win these next 4 games, they would be 9-9. Illinois and Rutgers on the road are the final 2 games. So if you're finishing 9-11 in conference play for a team that talent-wise is kind of on the bottom end of the Big Ten, I mean, that's a really, really good first year for Micah Shrewsbury. I mean, I think that he's definitely established himself as a really, really good coach.
All right. Speaking of teams that could be on the bottom of the Big Ten standings if they don't start quickly in the fall. Did you like that segue? Speaking of Penn State teams, I am talking about James Franklin's Nittany Lions. I'm not even joking. This is a team. This is a team that started 2020 0-5. This is a team that went 2-6 in their last 8 in 2021. This is a team that's 11-11 in the last 2 years. James always likes to talk about the run from 2016 through 2019, and he's right to do that because they very impressive. Winning that many games, 42, I think, a Big Ten title, 2 New Year's Six games, great stuff. You also got to talk about 14, 15, 20, and 21. The schedule is not exactly easy. We talked last week about the number of guys, Daniel, they have going to Indianapolis for the scouting combine. 8 could have easily been 9. It's not. It wouldn't be surprising if they had 8, 9, or maybe even more drafted. It's hard to look at that number of kids getting drafted and then looking at that record. It's hard to kind of rationalize that. So I just think that the Penn State fan base is eagerly awaiting the start to the season on a Thursday night. And one of the reasons they are, Daniel, is the young players. It's not just the true freshmen in the 2022 class. Oh, hold on one second. I gotta cut this caller off. It was not Dave Jones. It was another Dave. Sorry about that, guys. But I think the young players have the fan base excited. I've been writing about some young players who could be players to watch in 2022. By that I mean key role players, starters, maybe even impact players as young players. And I have a list of 4 guys, and you could certainly chime in, but of this list that I'm like, I just wonder if we're really excited enough about some of these young guys. I think these young guys are going to be key players if Penn State's going to kind of get it back on track. And I'll start with one. As I prepared this list, I didn't even write anything down, Daniel. It's all just up here in this giant skull. I'll start with 2. It's the King twins, Kalen King and Kobe King. I think these guys absolutely could have a very huge say in what Penn State's final record is going to be. And I'm not trying to put pressure on them. I'm going the other way. I just think they're that talented, and they're poised to be key contributors. Kalen, down the stretch, that final month, I thought was very good as he got more reps at corner. He's not afraid to tackle. He's good in coverage. He can run. He was the spring standout even before the season. And Kobe King, with 2 linebacker spots open at 240 pounds, he's probably their biggest, in terms of talented linebackers, he's probably their biggest talented linebacker. It sure seems like to me he's a guy they're going to look at hard in the middle of the field. How do you feel about the Kings? And maybe I think Penn State fans should probably be a little bit more excited about them.
Yeah, definitely. I think that it's kind of with Kalen King, the expectations were set pretty high for him last year, and just given kind of playing time, you kind of knew that even though you were hearing so much about him that you weren't gonna see him too much, just because of being a true freshman and playing a position where Penn State already had 2 established starters on the outside, and Joey Porter Jr. and Tariq Castro-Fields. So I think that he got plenty of valuable experience last year. He got a lot of run in the bowl game, got a lot of run down the stretch, was on the field in some key points. Yeah. So I think that Kalen King will definitely be someone to watch, especially when you have the open spot opposite Joey Porter Jr. with Tariq Castro-Fields moving on. Yeah. So I think that it'll kind of be cool to, I guess, kind of put a lot more eyes to what we were hearing last year and what the coaching staff was saying. And then Kobe King, I think that when you look at the roster just based on need and where Penn State is going to have to replace some starters, I think that that's a really, really good guy to be excited about. Because you have to replace those 2 starters at linebacker. Obviously, Curtis Jacobs will move to that will spot, depending on how close Manny Diaz kind of keeps it to the template that Brent Pry said. But you got to replace Ellis Brooks and Brandon Smith, and I think that Kobe King has the chance to do that. He's going to be a redshirt freshman. They saved that red shirt. He got some experience here and there. We were also hearing good things about him in the spring, so I think that it's kind of he probably has maybe the best shot at really stepping in. Obviously, Kalen King does too, but Johnny Dixon's there. There's a lot of cornerbacks on the roster. Defensive backs can kind of rotate through, but just kind of what's at linebacker depth-wise, I think that it's a really, really prime opportunity for Kobe King. Yeah.
And with regard to the corner room, Tariq Castro-Fields will be missed, but he was a guy that sometimes we didn't see a lot of. Now, I know he had a good Senior Bowl, but He had trouble staying healthy at times, and he wasn't on the field even when he was healthy at times. I know they like to rotate their corners, but I think Penn State's fans, Daniel, to your point, should feel really good about a corner room that features Joey Porter Jr. if he can kind of eliminate some of those penalties, because they became a problem during the second half of the season. I thought his first half of the season, though, was very good. I thought he made some big plays. He made a huge play on the goal line in the Wisconsin game that people tend to overlook. I think he had an interception against Indiana, but I thought he was playing good. And then once he started getting flagged, I don't know if he got a little tentative or it went the other way, but this is a talented player. And then Daquan Hardy as a slot corner, I just think his experience, if you remember, he closed the regular season, I think, with a pick 6 in the Michigan State game. Johnny Dixon is another good mention. I think there's no reason why he shouldn't be one of Penn State's top 4 corners. That's a pretty good depth chart, I think, if you're Manny Diaz in Penn State. And as far as the linebackers go, I don't want to say Kobe King is the guy to beat out, maybe starting inside. But when you look at the middle linebacker options and you look at how big you need to be for that position, I mean, he's got the body type and he's got the athleticism. To me, maybe Manny Diaz looks at it differently, but I mean, he looks to me like a guy that should be getting maybe first crack. I know Charlie Katcher and Tyler Elsdon are in the mix as well, but I think Kobe King is a pretty special player. I'm more curious what they're going to do on the strong side. If you're right and they kick Curtis inside to the will position, who would be the guy? Because that's the guy that's got to kind of be more of a coverage player. He's got to be pretty quick too. I don't know if it would be another redshirt freshman Jamar Buden. I don't know if they're going to use maybe a safety in that role and they're going to play. There'll be just a lot of 2 linebacker sets and maybe more 5 DB sets. I don't know if it's going to be Jonathan Holland, who is back, I think, for his 6th year, too.
Sutherland.
John Holland. John Sutherland. I don't even know why I get those 2 confused. John Sutherland, number 0. I mean, John Sutherland, I guess, is a guy that could be the answer as a kind of a hybrid player that Penn State likes. But I would hope they would give somebody like Buden a look at one of those 3 positions.
I think Sutherland will get the first crack at it. I know that before the bowl game, James Franklin said that's kind of Jonathan Sutherland's kind of long-term outlook was at linebacker. And then last week when Penn State started its winter workouts and each position coach was shouting out their top competitor of the day at their respective positions, Sutherland got the nod from Manny Diaz, defensive coordinator and linebackers coach. So I think that shows that Sutherland will get that first crack at that Sam linebacker because he can play in space. He might not have necessarily been athletic enough to play safety full time, but I think that he probably has a little bit more athleticism than maybe the average linebacker. So I think that that's something that'll definitely be worth watching just because the numbers at linebacker last year, Penn State just got so lucky that the only time that people missed were when Brooks was suspended for targeting late in the Wisconsin game and for the first half of the Ball State game. So Jesse Luketa moved back to middle linebacker. And then when Curtis Jacobs missed the Rutgers game because of the flu, that was when Jonathan Sutherland came down to the Sam. And obviously the bowl game was kind of a different animal with moving pieces around at linebacker with Smith and Brooks out. But I think for the most part last year, Penn State didn't really have to look at the depth, and kind of when you pull that curtain back, it's really interesting, and it's going to fit together in a much different way this year and beyond.
Talking about Penn State young players to watch this year, and maybe not only watch, but I think that they have a chance to be, hit the ground running and not just be role guys, but guys that could really help this team. Because they did lose. They've lost a lot of key players, and it's going to show up at the combine. It's going to show up in the NFL draft, the depth hits that they have taken. It's great to be excited about the quarterback room, and Penn State fans should be. But they're still that might be something you want to be more excited about at midseason or maybe even in 2023 because Sean Clifford is back. I'm talking about young players who I think really can help the team. Almost immediately. Before I ask you for one, I want to get to another guy that I think that all signs point to him, Penn State feeling really, really good about him. And that is our guy, Olu Fashanu, who started at left tackle. I've just given up on, I don't even try and write or type his whole name only because I know I'm going to just mess it up. And the fact that everyone else is just going with Olu has been a blessing for me. It's much easier for me to get around that name. But the fact that he was the starter at left tackle and, Landon Tengwall was not the starter at left tackle in the bowl game, even though Landon did some good things, I think, against Rutgers, I think James Franklin was telling the truth when he said that he would have, if he hadn't had an injury earlier in the year, he would have probably played when Rasheed Walker couldn't go. And I thought he did pretty well against the Razorbacks. And I think Landon Tengwall is a good player. So if they like Olu a little bit better than Landon, I think that speaks to a guy that maybe they feel very comfortable about playing a key position at left tackle.
Yeah, I think Fashanu is going to have first crack at that left tackle spot. Obviously, Tengwall was since he didn't play, we didn't see him until the very end of the year. There's a lot of mystery on, all right, can he play on the edge? Is he going to play inside? How is that going to shake out? And then we saw him for the first time playing tackle when in that Rutgers game when things were kind of very unsettled. But I think the fact that he played guard in the bowl game with that kind of month of practice leading up to it, I think that kind of shines a light on the long-term future for him. And I think that it's going to be really, really interesting to see what he can do in year 2 and then Fashanu in year 3. I mean, when you talk about the offensive linemen, when they get to college, it's all right in your second and third year. You kind of get the full picture of what this player might be able to do, what he might be able to become, because he has time in the system, has time in the weight room. And Fashanu is listed at 6'6", 313 pounds. I'm really interested to see what he'll be listed at come
August. The over.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, way over.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember one of the things that Mike Yersit said, I think the day before the bowl game when he was made available, I think he was asked specifically about Olu, and he said, strength's never going to be an issue with Olu. And 6'6", 317, that sounds like huge, but really if you're really 6'6", that's not a lot of weight for an offensive tackle. There's some offensive tackles that can play at 325, 330 and look really good. So for him to be that strong, yeah, I'll be curious. I bet you he's closer to 325, I think, probably by the time, the Purdue game on September 1st rolls around. Okay, Daniel, do you have a guy? We've been talking about it for a little while. Is there a young guy you think Penn State fans should be more excited about as we head into spring training that maybe they're not quite as excited about now?
I think one of the wide receivers that pops up for me is Harrison Wallace III. He's someone where you saw his basketball highlights from his senior year of high school where he's just dunking all over everyone, really athletic. We saw him, I don't think we saw Liam Clifford at all last year, maybe until the bowl game, but we did see Harrison Wallace here and there. They kept his red shirt. So he's going to be a redshirt freshman, and I think that he'll have a chance we'll be able to see how much more refined he is. And we've seen that Taylor Stubblefield has done a really nice job with Parker Washington and Keandre Lambert-Smith and kind of developing those guys and refining them. And even though Washington came in already pretty refined, but Lambert-Smith you saw him taking the steps forward. So with someone who's kind of as raw and an athlete as Harrison Wallace or Trey Wallace, I think that he is someone who will kind of be able to see the product of coaching when he's on the field and through the summer and into the fall.
Yeah, I did notice him. I did notice him. He did play, I think, a couple of snaps in the Outback Bowl loss to Arkansas. But with the skill set that we've seen in terms of him being a basketball player and his size, he does seem like he is a fit as an outside receiver who can be a threat either running by defenders or just simply winning contested catches with that kind of ability to jump. So I don't know how close he is to being maybe a top 4 or top 5 guy when you talk about Parker coming back, when you talk about Mitchell Tinsley, when you talk about Keandre Lambert-Smith, and you talk about Malik Mega, and you mentioned Clifford. So I just think that there's going to be a lot of competition, I think, in the wideout group, because they can say they want to play 6 guys, but really, it's going to be like four guys are going to get the bulk of the snaps, and the top 3, are going to play more than anyone else, especially when Penn State goes to 2 tight end sets. So that third guy won't be playing a lot. So you really want to be in the top 4, I think, come September, early October, if you want to have, I think, a meaningful year. And I'm glad, Daniel, you mentioned Harrison Wallace, because my final pick, I'm going to go with the true freshman. I know he's ballyhooed, but I think Kaden Saunders, just kind of getting up to speed on his recruitment and what he projects at, what he can do for Penn State, and what his toolkit looks like, man. The fact that he's going to get a spring to kind of work and learn the offense, man, he is a guy, as a true freshman, that I just think that if Parker Washington can do what he did in 2020, and he didn't even have a lot of offseason work, I think Saunders is Parker's a great athlete and a great player, but I think Saunders it might even be a little bit better, and everyone wants to mention KJ Hamler when they talk about him. So to me, he's a guy that, if that comparison is on the money, him in the slot could be a dangerous thing when he's on the field.
Yeah, I think Saunders, of the incoming freshmen and especially the early enrollees, he's going to have the best chance to produce. You kind of watch his tape, he can do a little bit of everything, and I think that he'll be one of those players who is just kind of always open, that somehow underneath, when you need kind of a safety net, at least earlier in his career, that he'll be able to get open, get the ball in his hands, make some things happen, and then maybe you kind of sprinkle him in a little bit more as that vertical threat. So I think that he's someone to be really excited about, and kind of outside of Nicholas Singleton, I think that Saunders has kind of the best chance to come in and contribute right away, based on position and just kind of the overall nature of his skill set and kind of what Penn State needs, because Parker Washington is kind of set to be that number 1 receiver coming into this year. And so I think that we might see him used a little bit differently in 2022 than he was in 2021. And Saunders is there to kind of step in and maybe take over a little bit of that, kind of number 2, 3 slot role that we saw Washington do a lot of.
Yeah, and just to follow up, I'm glad you brought Singleton up, because here's my and I've heard nothing but great things about him. I know some people who've kind of coached in the area that they're saying, look, he's going to be as good as advertised. If you're Katron Allen and you're as talented as Katron Allen is, aren't you just a little bit tired of hearing about Nick Singleton? Aren't you a little bit tired? Like, let's get. No one has mentioned Katron Allen, and he was a very, very high 4-star. He's built like a tank. He did some great things. Coveted kid. I have to think, if anyone is motivated, the most motivated player of the 2022 class that's coming in might be Katron Allen, just because, as good as Singleton could be, and it's great that they have Kevon Lee, I just think that you don't hear anyone talking about Allen. No one.
Yeah, and the fact that Katron Allen is coming in from IMG Academy, so he's basically been in a college program for the past 2 years, that he knows kind of how things work. I think like 5'11", 220, 225, like that's a load. And you can see him run over people. It's a lot of fun to watch, and maybe that style of play will take maybe a year to really translate to the next level, just because of the physical nature of things. But yeah, I think that he's someone that you can't sleep on, you can't forget about. Noah Cain's gone, John Lovett's gone. There are reps available in that backfield, and obviously Singleton is an easy one to kind of pencil in, but I think that Katron Allen will have a role. He's too talented. I think he has the experience needed, and will be able to make the adjustment, and you'll be able to kind of figure out where to fit him in, and give him his spots. And I think that he'll be something that's beyond just like a goal line back or a short yardage back too. I think that he's someone who can really be part of an offense. So it's some pretty good, pretty interesting weapons for Mike Yurcich and these incoming freshmen.
Daniel, do you think, do you think that after Penn State gets through winter conditioning and then spring practice and the blue-white game concludes on April 23rd at Beaver Stadium, just write that down, Penn State fans, April 23rd. Do you think that some guys, like I'm thinking of a guy like Devin Ford, if these two true freshmen are looking good, and Kevon Lee, Do you think there's going to be some movement in that running back room coming out of spring practice if those guys really flash early and look like they're legit guys? Because if Katron Allen has a role and Singleton has a role and Kevon Lee has a role, if you're Keziah Holmes, who I still like, or Devin Ford, it's a numbers game, man. Like, why am I staying here?
Yeah, I think last year they kind of made a big deal about, we have five running backs with experience.
Yeah.
We can use them, but when push came to shove, it was only really 3 at the most.
Yeah.
And sometimes even just 2, depending on how the game was going. So I think in general there's going to be a lot of movement in the spring. I mean, it seems like that from kind of seeing our subscriber reaction to some things and stuff like that, there's kind of a lot of, Penn State should have done more in the portal. They could have done more in the portal. And it's kind of like, well, it's not done yet. There's still going to be another round of movement after spring ball. There's still guys that entered the portal after the end of last season who haven't made their decisions yet. And so I think that we're going to have another round of portal entries. And obviously that goes both ways. So Penn State will probably see some guys move on. But that also means that Penn State can have some guys come in. And obviously you want to have them in at the semester so you can get spring practice with them and everything, but at the same time, when it's portal guys, there's already some physical development, there's already some experience, you would hope, in terms of the players you're bringing in. So I mean, it's going to be a thing where, all right, we spent a couple weeks after the Outback Bowl kind of monitoring, waiting to see movement. And now at the end of spring ball, come April 24th, April 25th, we're going to be looking again for some more movement. So, it's one of those things too where it's a two-way street. So guys will be coming, guys will be going. And I think that the Penn State roster will continue to shift a little bit more.
Yep, agree with you 100%. Before we get out of here on the blue-white breakdown, is there another guy you want to mention, or are you gonna save some of this quality content for a future blue-white breakdown podcast with me? Is there anyone else that you really, really like? A young player that maybe just not getting talked about yet, but boy, by September, everyone's going to be going, man, he's a really good player.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jalen Reed at safety is the big one because there is an open job next to Jair Brown. But I don't know. I mean, I think overall, the one guy that I've kind of been thinking about the most when kind of looking over the roster is Harrison Wallace, because I think we've had kind of the Malik Mega conversation a couple times where there's a lot of good things being said about him, but we haven't quite seen it on the field yet.
Agreed.
And so I bought into it too, and I think that he still could be a really good player, but I do think that it's still a little premature to pencil him in to be that number 4, that number 5, and you look at someone like Harrison Wallace who has some tools and has some things that can happen, and I think that he should be in that conversation, but at the same time, there's a lot of competition. Tinsley came in, Saunders came in, Washington and Lambert Smith came back in. They're not really going to go 6 deep in the normal rotation, so it's interesting. But I think Harrison Wallace III is kind of a name that I've been trying to get a little bit further up in my mind as we go through winter and go into spring practice.
I know this: if they make Harrison Wallace available on a Zoom call this spring, I know at least one person that's going to sign up to want to talk to Harrison Wallace, and you're going to be. I think you're probably the leader on the bandwagon for Harrison Wallace. I like it. It's not like it's a huge go out on a limb pick, but I just think that to your point, you have the kid from Western Kentucky, you have Kaden Saunders, you have guys coming back, you have Malik Mega. So if you're right on this one, that's going to be a feather in your cap. Not only that, you should wear a cap with a feather in it in the fall when we do future podcasts, because you're the first one I've heard talk him up this much.
Well, kind of reading between the lines a little bit in terms of the winter workouts and who's getting shouted out. Obviously it's the off season. We're not seeing it, so we don't know for sure. But it is kind of interesting to read between the lines on who's getting shouted out. I mean, through 3 practices or workouts, Kevon Lee is the only running back who's gotten mentioned by Jaywan Sider. But Harrison Wallace III was mentioned after the second practice. Jaden Dotton, Keandre Lambert-Smith. So it's one of those things where it's another little data point to kind of, when stuff's happening behind the scenes that we're not seeing, to kind of make a little bit of a picture, try to figure out what's maybe going on a little bit.
Yeah, Daniel, I don't know how good the Penn State running back room is going to be by like October, but in terms of physical specimens, I would put their running back room with anyone's in the country between Allen, Singleton, and Kevon Lee in the top three. And I'm not, and because Holmes is another guy that's not small, but those guys are all. They are all, I think they listed Kevon Lee at almost 240. He didn't even look like he was 240. I think Singleton's, 210, 215. The other freshman's 220. Those are some thumpers, man, and a couple of them can really run. So I just hope that they just play the best guys and they commit to the run. So, the quarterback isn't throwing the ball 40 times a game, because it's not a recipe for winning football, I think, in this offense. As much as people want to see them throw the ball, if they can't run the ball any better, it's going to be a tough go, I think, for this team in the fall.
Yeah, I think that running back group is definitely going to be an all-star team in terms of getting off the bus, going through pregame warm-ups.
And first couple of seats, man. Those are big boys.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure that there's going to be some linebackers watching film that aren't necessarily going to be super thrilled with what they have to go up against. Some corners, there might be some business decisions when Kevon Lee and Katron Allen get into the open field.
That's why they're called business decisions. All right, Daniel, I know you got to get ready for another podcast later this week, and I know you got Penn State, Minnesota, 4 o'clock Thursday up there in State College. Hopefully they can build on this nice little win and kind of keep it rolling. You said it sounds like the next couple games are very winnable for them. So let's see if they can make up some ground, get some confidence, and you just never know if they get on a roll. It wouldn't be the first time, but it sounds like you're having fun covering the team. It's going to be warmer the next couple of days, in the 60s. So I don't know what that means in State College. I just know in Harrisburg it's going to be near 60. So that's probably like, high 40s in State College. That's still going to feel warm for you.
Oh, yeah. It's in the 30s today, but I think we're supposed to touch 60 tomorrow and maybe Friday. So I'll get outside, get some fresh air, and enjoy the sights of State College.
All right, Daniel, take care of yourself. We'll talk next week.